It is the Final Word Cricket Podcast, Season 16, Episode 22. Adam Collins and Jeff Lemon back together again. It's a weekly episode of the show. I'm in London. Jeff's in Lisbon. It's a Monday morning, Jeff. I always like it when we're recording on a Monday morning to start the week. Lots to get through. Busy agenda. Dan Brettig joining the show.
Monday morning kind of guy. You're like, time to get up and iron my shirt and go about. In many ways, we are different people, and that is a salient example.
Yeah.
Monday morning is. I don't want to get all Garfield on it, but I'd rather just skip forward to at least a Monday night or a Tuesday.
Yeah, well, that's right. I don't have that luxury, shall we say, when the girls are up early and I've got to send them off, and that signals the start of my most productive time of the week when the girls aren't with me because they're at nursery. You see, that's how I think of it. Where you and I can get cracking, and we will today. Busy agenda, quite a lot going on around the world with global cricket politics, which we dip into fairly often, and most of the time it's with Dan Brettig, the chief cricket choro at the Age, and we do again today. He's been tracking all things Jay Shah, BCCI, ICC machinations, and the MCC Cricket Connects conference, which ties the whole thing together from last week at Lord's. Lots of cricket, domestic cricket in England. There have been internationals played over here between England's women and New Zealand's women. South Africa's women are still in India. Quite a bit going on with the Afghanistan women's team as well, the refugee team who've been exiled in Australia, and a bit going on in America to boot. Jeff, hello to you. One thing I forgot to mention when we came together to record Storytime 192 on Friday when we were reunited, was that you ended up on telly last week, or a social media video that you posted of the hurricane when you were stuck there when Beryl was ripping through, ended up on the CBS nightly news. That's an unusual thing to happen. Hello.
It was an unusual one. It was just some footage that I took, because I posted up some stuff from the Sunday night when it was coming through, and then a few agencies were getting in contact. So I was talking to someone from Reuters and ended up just wandering around town, filming a bunch of shit the next day, just to give a sense of what was going on there, because it seemed like a vaguely useful thing that I could do. So I don't know how things get passed on from one to another, but it was nothing very sensational. It's not Stanley Kubrick stuff, but palm trees blowing in the wind, that kind of thing. Just give a bit of texture. Yes, it's both tropical and windy, the two components of a hurricane in the Caribbean.
We'll always be at some level hustling freelancers, even if it means becoming cameraman for 10 minutes or whatever it works out to be. It's going to be a busy week looking forward at Lord's. Jimmy Week is finally here. I mean, I know this was announced, was it 6 to 8 weeks ago, something like that James Anderson will be playing a farewell test match against the West Indies that starts on the 10th of July. But a lot going on, because on the night of day one, that's when the England men play their Euro semi-final against the Netherlands, which is going to be a huge deal. I know, Jeff, we've spoken a little bit on this on the show before about how enormous and overpowering football tournaments are when they're happening when you're in London. But the Lord's Test match, imagine if Anderson bowls on day one. I wonder whether they'll keep Lord's open. It wouldn't be a bad idea to keep the big screens on and keep the bars and food outlets open and let everyone stick around till 10 p.m. or whatever it is. But yeah, Jimmy, one last time. We'll certainly be there making the daily shows, and the preview from tomorrow, I'll be down there at Lord's watching the press conferences and all the rest of it. But yeah, it's going to be a significant week. Anderson finally hanging up the boots.
It could work really well. If you were running one of the establishments, you would want that to happen. Your sales would be outstanding, and people watching a different sport at a stadium for something else it's become a bit of a modern theme. You remember the Matildas penalty shootout, wasn't it? At one of the Aussie Rules games at the MCG, wasn't it? When that was that was packed out. There was one this week as well, wasn't there? With England with their penalties in the previous shootout.
This was great. This was so there's this tournament that wouldn't have hit your radar, I don't suppose, Jeff. It's like they've brought these like Legends Leagues or whatever.
I saw the team lineups.
Yeah, and like the team lineups aren't too shabby, right? But it's they're a bit of a dime a dozen. They pop up all the time. No one really pays attention to them. But
loosely defined, legend being loosely applied in these contexts.
If you've played for your country, you're a decent chance, if you're available, of getting a start. And some of the higher profile players from yesteryear are there. But India playing Pakistan's still a thing, right? Because obviously they don't play too often. So even if it's their legends, it drew a pretty big crowd at Edgbaston. And a social media video went viral of the after the cricket match finished, everyone was downstairs watching the England-Switzerland shootout in their Pakistan shirts and India shirts, and all going fucking ballistic when Trent Alexander-Arnold cannoned the fifth penalty in to make sure that England were going to progress. The old Tebbit test thing, Jeff, that is old and hackneyed and cliched and so on, but people wearing Pakistan and India shirts but being enthusiastically supporting the England football team. It was a nice reminder of the best of, I guess, modern Britain, the modern world, where you can maintain allegiances to more than one place all at the same time, and we're mature enough to manage that.
Well, and why not? I mean, if you've got, it's like, how good is the team that you can follow in something else, right? Like, you don't actually have a Pakistan or an India team at the pointy end of football World Cups and so on. That isn't something that's happened. So, but if it did happen, I'm sure there'd be similar. The same people would be passionately supporting those teams. But if you've got a team that you can follow somewhere locally, then they happen to be good at one thing or another thing. You're not getting super pumped for Australia in a football sense, because they're never going to be likely to be at the real business end of those tournaments. But so then it's like, well, who else can you follow? And football supporters in Australia would generally find themselves attaching to some bit of their heritage and going for the Dutch because they had a great grandfather from there, or whatever it might be, because you want to have some investment in that, and as it's definitely happened when I've traveled around the world, different places I've been living in, when I'll get invested in whatever the local sport team is for that particular place that happens to be good at whatever it is that they do, as opposed to the sports where they don't have an influence.
Yeah, it doesn't work for every Australian living in London, but in my family situation, with my background and all the rest of it, like, I love it when England are playing in tournaments, playing in football tournaments. I don't find it difficult at all barracking for the men's team or the Lionesses. I remember watching the Lionesses Euros final a couple of years ago with Winnie, thinking that's quite a significant thing. Like, when she's older, I'll be able to tell her that she watched that, provided she takes an interest in sport. And anyway, just a bit of news, breaking news. The benefit of having tubes in our producer window as we record this, Jimmy Anderson has just said that this test match will be his final game this year. So no decision on Lancashire just yet, but that's been reported by Will McPherson, regular on the final word. I assume that was I think what that means is, if I'm reading between the lines, that is saying that Jimmy won't play in the final 4 county championship games that he would be otherwise available for, because he won't be playing Test cricket. So I suppose he's leaving open the option to playing for Lancs in 2025, but won't play the remaining games this year. Remembering that he took
he's doing the
seventh
thing.
Yeah, he's going to be the mentor of the England bowling group for the rest of the. I don't know how long he signed up to do that for, but not the coach, but the mentor. The rest of this summer, is it? Okay, so all he's nationally contracted, he'll prioritise that ahead of playing for Lancs. But even that, there's not complete crossover. There would have been availability for him to play in September once those Sri Lanka test matches are over. Presumably that means he'll be with the one-day squad when Australia are out here playing 8 white ball games. So maybe Anderson will do a bit of that with the younger guys coming through
in one-day cricket.
That's true. And, that does make sense, by the way, that if the younger guys who are playing in the one-day team, having Jimmy with them for 2 weeks, like, that's a pretty big resource to draw down on. So more on that story, but and more on Jimmy and what he did for Lancashire when we get to our county wrap later in the episode. Jeff, our episode is always brought to you by Westfield London and Westfield Stratford City. Before we come to that, we forgot to mention last week when you weren't here, we've gone to quite a lot of effort to set up this ad-free feed. I want you just to remind our listenership of what that's all about, because I sometimes get confused myself because I'm not quite into the RSS feeds and so on. You have a go.
Okay, so there is sometimes automated ads that drop into the show. Sometimes you don't get them. Depends where you are in the world. Sometimes we say we're going to a break and then we're immediately back, and that's confusing. But in other places, you might get some pre-recorded ads. You might not like those. You might not like the time that they take. That's fine. You have an option. This is a world of options where if you sign up to Patreon, if you jump on there to support us at whatever level you see fit, you've got control over that. Then you can get access to your own personal secret RSS feed, which is the bit of data that tells you when there's a new episode that's dropped. And what it cleverly does is just drop out the inserted advertising at the same time, because if you're supporting us on that platform, then we think that you should be allowed to not have to wait through the ad breaks if you don't want to. And if you don't want to support us on that platform, you can do it with the advertising model. It's the way that commercial television has worked for years, aside from the ability to opt out. Because remember, that was the big thing in the 90s when they were bringing in pay TV in Australia. They're like, ad-free, asterisk, for like the first 2 years, and then we'll start jamming ads in there anyway because, we've got to milk as much cash out of this as we can. That's not what we're doing. We're not doing that bit. So it's up to you. If you want to have that option, you do have that option. Patreon.com/thefinalword.
Yeah, and the wider point here is that by joining Patreon and thus Discord, you get to have these conversations with like great, lovely cricket people who we will now be friends with for life. And we have a lot to do with each other outside of, I guess, the podcast and the different events that we put on. There's a meetup this week for the Lord's Test match, I believe, that's being arranged. I went out to watch Block Party last night with a dear friend of mine who I don't know from Discord, but he's on there because he supports the show, and away it goes. So this is its own community, and the best way to support the show by an absolute mile is patreon.com/thefinalword. If you've been a long-term listener, maybe you've been a patron in the past, we'd love to have you back. And we don't paywall any of our shows. That's the other thing here. The best way for us to enhance or augment our patron subscriber base would probably be to paywall story time, right?
Yeah, to do subscriber only stuff. It just doesn't sit right with us.
Doesn't feel right.
We want the show to be available to anyone who wants to listen to it.
Yeah.
So we've never done that. And I don't know. It was supposed to be an open world, right? The internet's supposed to be open. So, but it is the best way you can help out, and it is fun. So you don't know this, but on Saturday night, I was out in Lisbon. A guy tapped me on the shoulder in a bar. I'm Alex. And I was like, hang on, I've had conversations with you on the internet before. Lives in Spain, happened to be on holiday in Lisbon, and happened to be in the same bar that I walked into early on a Saturday evening, and was anxiously watching the England penalties at the same time. But So
can I guess? Can I guess which Alex it was? So we know our patrons. Is it Alex Velianovsky?
No.
No, that's the patron is Alex I know, the last name of. Anyway, it's just a nice, satisfying name to say.
It is a good name. I do enjoy it. But, we'd had some correspondence about Spain when I was travelling in Spain, because he's been living there for years and years, but did not expect that we would randomly meet in a beer garden in Lisbon. But there you go. These things can happen. Nice
one. Yeah, just to round out that thought from before, we could paywall story time, and that would definitely increase patron numbers. But we want that show to be free to access. But of course, if you can help us make the time, it all boils down to making sure that we don't have to then go off and do 27 other things, and we can focus all our time on the podcast, which is what we prefer to do. We're also supported week in, week out by our primary commercial partner, Westfield London, Westfield Stratford City, who do truly great things for our show and have been great supporters of our audience as well, with the £50 vouchers and the watch along party which they paid for, and the major prize and so on. Westfield London and Westfield Stratford City are your home of sport this summer, Jeff, and there is no better place to catch any of the action from Wimbledon, which we're into week 2 of now, the Olympic Games. Now, this is the kind of thing I will definitely initiate a watch along for some Olympics nights. And England's Test match summer, or any of the inaction from the rest of England's Euros campaign, very good. Catch the games at Bat and Ball and the Heineken Sports Bar, at Gravity Max in the east, or Westwood and Sixers in the west, as well as the big screen on Westfield Square. That's the square, I think, where they had the huge Christmas tree last year, Jeff. And if you're sitting and watching thinking, I could do better, then Gymshark is the place for you and all of your athleisure looks. Opening on the 13th of July at Westfield Stratford City. Gymshark. I'm usually talking about Baby Shark. That's just now entered Peggy's world from nursery. Oh, no. Baby Shark. Winnie's at the other end of Baby Shark, and Peggy's coming into it. It does other fun things too, but that's okay. Gymshark, Westfield Stratford City. They're our guys. Thanks for being with us.
Okay, Gymshark sounds dangerous. Sounds dangerous. All right, what do we got? Let's look at what we should be talking about this week. The interesting bit, the most exciting bit, I thought, for this week, I really enjoyed seeing all the vision coming out of India with the homecoming of that World Cup squad, because I mean, fucking hell, like it was quite impressive. Some of those drone shots going over Marine Parade in Mumbai, and been to the stadium there a number of times, and sort of the highway further along, and the just incredible crush of people that had come down there to catch a glimpse of the T20 World Cup winning team. I guess it felt like a reminder of the significance of this for that audience, like the emotional significance of having won something on the world stage, the amount of angst that there was after losing that, actual World Cup, 50 over World Cup last year, the sense of how much it mattered. And I guess it was a reminder, like it really drove home for me just how massive it would have been had they closed out that 50 over World Cup, because we all saw it from the perspective of how interesting it was to have all of this hype and expectation then punctured. But had it actually been able to flourish, that hype would have been just extraordinary, to be in the middle of there. Maybe less so in Ahmedabad because it's a quieter sort of city, but having that in a bigger, more sort of densely packed kind of place like Mumbai made it different again. And I guess a reminder of, we hear about it all the time, the kind of the power, the economic power of India based on the population base, but seeing that population base actually shoulder to shoulder, sort of head counted on the street, was an extraordinary reminder of just how potent that is, and that's just a tiny fraction of the people in one city in a vast country turning out. But it was quite adrenaline fueling to actually watch that level of intensity and that level of like how much it mattered to that many people to come out and be part of that moment.
Yeah, it definitely did. And that was a visual representation of how much winning a trophy meant. I must admit, like, part of me, I think due to the naming convention, right? There was the World Cup and there was the World T20. When the World T20 became a World Cup, I think in my own mind, I've always felt that the World Cup, the 50 over tournament, just means more than the 20 over World Cup. The frequency of T20 World Cups, there were
longevity.
Was there 5 of them in the first 8 years or something like that? And they've been brought back as every 2 years. And we've had 3 in a hurry because, of course, the 2020 tournament was shuffled back due to COVID. So we've had 3 T20 World Cups
4 years
in the space of 4 years. So in my own mind, I don't feel like that's, let's have a ticker tape parade for winning it. My own thinking, my own value judgment is that if you win the 50 over World Cup, that's cause for the enormous celebration. But I'm running that through the filter as someone who's been, as a fan and as a kid growing up, prioritizing the 50 over World Cup as the premier trophy. But in India, there is a tweak there. 20 over cricket has been omnipresent. The IPL has been the thing that's followed with as much fervor as anything else. We would never have a domestic tournament in Australia or in England, although in England it's a little bit different. But in Australia, certainly, where there'd be even close to the passion arrived at through T20 cricket domestic league. The big, you compare how do people feel about their big bash teams compared to the way that IPL fans feel about their IPL franchise. It's completely different. So all of that bedded into my existing feeling about World Cups and what one is and what one isn't. My instinct was, come on, guys, it's just a T20 World Cup. Like, let's not get too carried away. But again, stressing that point, I come from it from a completely different background and starting point. There in India, where T20 is king, where the T20 World Cup has meant so much, about winning a trophy full stop has meant the world to them. This is a reflection of that, because you're never going to see a response to Australia or England winning the T20 World Cup. They won the last 2. I don't think there would have been any public celebration in Australia in late 2021. In fact, I don't suppose many people outside of the most hardcore cricket fans would have even remembered that it happened. And in 2022, when England won the World Cup at the MCG, certainly for the hardcore cricket fans, it was a thing, but there was no like public ritual or anything like that. This is clearly different. And seeing it en masse was affecting. You're not conditioned to seeing that many human beings out on the street for anything, let alone a sporting celebration.
There was no public celebration in Australia for the 50 over World Cup last year. There was the team didn't come together at all at any point. They all went on and did other things. It got noticed, but it wasn't the biggest sporting story of the year. It wasn't, a huge outpouring of national pride. But I think there's a degree of privilege in that if you're an Australian cricket supporter and if you're people like us who grew up watching those teams, Australia won all the time. They won, through that period from 87 really through until I mean, 2011 losing in the quarters against India was like a huge shock at the time. What do you mean Australia lost a quarter final of the World? What do you mean they're out with 8 teams still in the tournament? That just didn't seem to make any sense. So you've got that. Australians are able to be very complacent about the success of their cricket team because it's always been, for such a long time, it's been so good. And right back to there's the first 8 England-Australia Test series in the 1800s that England win 8 in a row or retain 8 in a row. But pretty much from then on, Australia's the more successful side. Probably the most successful side in all respects across the entire history of international cricket. So there's always been that expectation, which means that you don't get the same kind of level of triumph and joy, I suppose.
Yeah, and you marry that. And look, there were major public celebrations in 1999. I mean, I was at the ticker tape parade at the town hall. I remember Dermot Bruton was stood on a balcony behind us. Hawthorn had beat St Kilda, a huge comeback, 10 goals down in the second term. That was only a few days before. I remember that well. But like now, maybe the world's changed a little bit and it is priced in a bit more. When England won the World Cup in 19 as well, the Men's World Cup in 19, there was a big celebration at Downing Street and there was a thing at the Oval and so on. So I'm not saying there's no public celebration when other teams win tournaments, but this was like a different level. This was a different level entirely. And again, I come back to my previous point. I think it's to do with the way that you and I and millions of fans in Australia and millions of fans in England interpret T20, where we see T20 as fitting compared to where Indian fans have been since 2008 when the IPL started. It is the main game. It is on Broadway. It is every night for 90 nights, whatever it is. It's the main TV show in town. It inspires the passion of millions. The Big Bash, if we get 20,000 to a game, it's worthy of a press release. Now, maybe not the case 5 years ago.
Well, but it's also about, I mean, the IPL's been around longer. If you think about that crowd, like who's most of the people making up that crowd from what we've seen in India as we travel around, I bet you that a huge proportion of that crowd are 17-year-old boys. They're 22-year-old men. They're 23, 24. They're young men who are out on the town because there's a thing that's happening, right? There's something that's going on, and it's free to get to, and it's difficult to get to, and there were problems with water supplies and all the rest of it, and you've got to stand around all day and so on. But it's something you can be part of that isn't going to cost you a stupid amount of money, like trying to get in to actually watch India play in the World Cup last year, which was impossible for so many people in India itself. And it's a chance to be part of something, but so much of that crowd would have been unattached young men floating around because they are the most evangelist cricket audience. And for them, 2008 when the IPL starts, it's been going for 16 years. It's been going for the entire lifetime, certainly the conscious lifetimes of anyone under about 25, 26 in India. 20 over cricket has been king for the entire time that they've been following the game. So for them, it's a lifelong thing. Whereas for us, it's always this odd sort of tertiary little addition that's always a bit carnival and a bit not quite to be taken seriously. And I think we probably just can't help. We probably won't ever quite be able to shake that interpretation. But it doesn't mean it's not significant, because all it requires to be significant is for it to matter to somebody, and it clearly matters to so many people.
The next major tournament's the Champions Trophy, Jeff, which it's been relegated yet further just for various reasons. It's back after a long time away. The last time we were at a Champions Trophy game, it was where Pakistan won it, and that was a huge deal when they beat India at the Oval in stunning circumstances. It would have been the June of 2017. But we have seen Tim Wigmore break the story yesterday. He's got the good oil on what the schedule might look like, and it does see India, in theory, visiting Lahore. That's the main takeout point. Now, we know in practice there is no way in the world that India will visit Pakistan. It would be seen as too much of a concession. It would be seen as giving too much away in the power structure that goes on there and all the wider history between those nations. Even though Pakistan, of course, went to India for the World Cup last year, but that's a different kind of flex that India can make in a situation like this. I am fascinated by this, though. Like, what actually happens to the tournament if Pakistan insist on hosting it there? Is there who has to make a concession here? What actually plays out? Does it just get moved to the UAE? Do they just go, fuck it, let's move the whole thing to Dubai and Abu Dhabi? Do Pakistan say we want to play our games at home and everything else can be played offshore? Do they play different groups in one country compared to the other? I don't know where it goes from here, but the draft schedule at least has India in Lahore. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we already knew the proposed venues, but what's come out is the full fixture with the dates and so on.
Yeah.
So they've made it as formal as they can at this stage, which is, it's only July and the thing doesn't start till later in February. So what's that? We've got a 9 months or so buffer, which is about 3 times as long as you usually get when the BCCI are running a tournament to get the fixtures. So it's a start. And basically, the way it looks is that PCB have made this as easy as possible for India to do it if they're willing to do it, and to basically give them as little reason as possible to pull out. So because it's only 3 games initially, because it's Champions Trophy, it's 8 teams, 2 groups of 4, play 3 times the other teams in your group and then go into knockouts. It's a lightning tournament, and that was always how it was supposed to be. Most teams are playing in 2 cities. They've got Rawalpindi, Karachi, Lahore are the only 3 venues, so most teams will be playing 2 games in one game in another. Some teams are playing in all 3. Pakistan will play in all 3. India's the only team that will play in only one city, so all of their games are listed in Lahore. They've got Bangladesh there on Feb 20, New Zealand Feb 23, and Pakistan on March 1. And the reasoning for that is...
They've been drawn in the same group, have they?
India
what?
And Pakistan have been drawn. Also, England and Australia have been drawn in the same group.
Whoa.
Again. Just
you wouldn't hear of it. You wouldn't read about it. You could go to Jeff. You used to spin the ball on the roulette thing when you were younger, or one of your early university jobs. Yeah. How many times in a row? What did you see? What was the most run, the biggest sequence of red or black coming up that you ever saw when you worked on the tables?
I once spun 24 in a row on black. What? 24 times in a row. And
that's like the probability of that's astronomical.
Oh yeah, it's probably billions to 1. It's at least hundreds of millions. It's extremely.
I thought you were going to say like 7 or something like that, which is.
You can get big streaks. It's just that the probability of that particular streak is as unlikely as the probability of any other streak.
Sure.
Very specific. Or
understood. Yeah.
If you laid down a sequence that went red, black, black, red, black, red, black, red, black, or something like that, that would.
I get the idea of the probability. It isn't just to do with that, but nevertheless, if you're picking a 50-50 outcome, the same one over and over again in a randomized way, which roulette should be.
Your odds
multiplying
each time, each subsequent occasion. It's like an exponentially increasing amount of unlikeliness. So remarkably, we've had that same thing happen again.
How many times in a row, though? Wow, that must be as often as your 24 times spinning black.
Something like 11, like the last 11 tournaments, maybe. Something might be there and thereabouts. Anyway, I actually don't have a problem with the book cooking on that, because that's how international cricket makes money, is having India play Pakistan. So
it's still funny.
It is funny. It is funny, but I'm broadly okay with it. I know some people get quite exercised about it and think that it's unethical and wrong. But look, if that's the way they make the cash, then it's a way that's not hurting anybody to make the cash.
Yeah, true.
Anyway, the point is that, as you know, when we went to Lahore, you know how close we were to the border where the sunset ceremony takes place and the show of arms and all the rest of it, because old mate was Cyril Radcliffe, wasn't it, who just drew the grey lead line down the middle of Punjab and said that half of it's going to be India and half of it's going to be Pakistan. So there's that sense of a severed country, in that, you've got Punjab in Pakistan, you've got Punjab in India. They're culturally very similar. There are all these families who were split up, with some on one side and some on the other. And it's the same region. It just happens to have an international border running down the middle of it. So the rationale is that you can drive from India to Lahore. Probably takes a couple of hours, as long as you can get through the border. So that would mean there'd be no airports, there'd be no worries about flights and security and that sort of thing there. There'd be the security required to get them from the border to Lahore, and then put them up in a well-fortified hotel there, and then stay there for that 11, 12 days and just get the thing done. So if the Indian government, particularly, because it comes down to a federal government thing really, if they're willing to make that concession, then it gives far fewer reasons for objection to want to pull out, in that they don't want to travel between multiple cities, they don't want that security exposure, et cetera, et cetera. If India do refuse to go, I guess you could just play the India games in Abu Dhabi, and because it's not that far away, for a few hours, it's a relatively short flight from Pakistan. So the other teams who they're playing could pop over and play India there, but then what happens once you reach the knockouts?
It'd actually be a really good thing for India to do to demonstrate that it isn't as crude a situation as I ham-fistedly played up before, right?
Sure.
I was obviously doing that for effect. I'm sure that'll come through on YouTube.
Mm.
But the reality is that it's going to require a big concession, like to be semi-serious about this.
Oh, yeah.
Again, a situation that we couldn't ever possibly entirely comprehend, and that'll surely inform the decisions that are made here. And yeah, it would be most unexpected if that schedule plays out as it's been briefed out overnight. Jeff, to stick on a similar theme, we've got a conversation coming up around politics of cricket. We do this every so often. Other side of the break, you'll have joining me, Dan Brettig, from The Age. It is the Final Word Cricket Podcast, Season 16, Episode 22. Thanks to Dan for jumping on. He's been busy making the phone calls, interviewing Mike there, doing the thing that Dan does. Looks like that photo had about, 150 people in the long room. They released a photograph of it at the end, and I feel like Dan might have spoken to like 50 of them to get the amount of information that he needed to write his stories over the weekend. Diligent journo, as he always is. After a fairly heavy-duty first 45 minutes of the show, or whatever it's been by now, Jeff, let's wind it back a bit. Let's change the energy a wee bit, and let's talk about the history of the game. How do we do that?
We do that via a little game we like to call Nerd Pledge. Nerd Pledge, the game we play with all the nice people on the internet who fund this program. They do that by sending through an amount of currency in their choice, usually specific, usually boutique. That number relates to cricket in some way. We have to figure out what it means. Paul Reeve, however, did not send through a boutique number. He sent through, I can't remember if it was pounds or dollars, might have been pounds. He sent through £2 flat, 200, but he told us that it related to two separate numbers of exactly 100. That was his clue to us, which we spent a fair bit of time on. I think you were looking at, Adam, were you looking at score? You were trying to find players who'd scored exactly 100 in the same game, like in a first-class game?
I found about 8 of them, I think, from memory, around that number. And there was one fairly recently. Was it Darren Bravo? I think it was Darren Bravo. Did it in a first-class game as recently as a couple of years ago. It's happened, I think, once in a test match. Or did we rule out test cricket? I think what I wanted was, I feel like it didn't happen. In other words, we Andrew Sampson kindly gave me a list of every time it's happened in first class cricket, and you can count them on your fingers.
Right. You don't need to bring the fingers of the foot into the equation.
No, the foot fingers
in Spanish.
In Spain, right? Yeah.
Centuries in both innings. Just having a little, I'm pretty sure there were no test examples, but there might have been.
I reckon I'd remember it more than the Darren Bravo doing it in domestic cricket. You know what I mean? Like that would jump out at me first. So I'm going to guess no.
There's an Earth Boy song called Naive Bravado, and somehow every time you say Darren Bravo, I think Naive Darren Bravo. There's Misbah with 101. If you remember his twins from Abu Dhabi back in 2014 that we were commentating, he made 101 and 101. So, which I think is the highest identical innings score. Anyway, it wasn't that because it wasn't about runs scored. It was about, as Paul subsequently told us, different categories, 102 different categories, but they're related. Paul followed up and said this: my pledge relates to a player I had a lot of affection for when I was first seriously getting into cricket, touted as a possible all-rounder, and had his moments with the bat, but will always be more associated with a famous duck. There was also a very good Frank end-of-career interview with him in The Guardian. So players who are touted as maybe being an all-rounder, there are so many of these. So A, it means they never get there. It means that they're not quite good enough in both disciplines. Cricket is full of these players, which you will remember who... I was thinking about this earlier when I was preparing this answer. It seems to me either it's like a bowler who makes some runs, has a few good innings, and people start pumping them up. That's the more common one. People pump them up as like maybe they'll be able to go up the order. Maybe they could bat 6 or 7, whatever it is. And
we do that, and we are so guilty of that on this show. Remember we did it, the worst, I think the time we misread the tea leaves on this most egregiously. He's gone on to play some extremely important innings for Australia. Remember when Cummins made, was it twin 50s at Joburg, and he made another 50 against India when the MCG, and we're like, he spent
about 6.
He spent 6 years in the test tube or in the hyperbaric chamber rebuilding him, but a lot of that time was spent, getting his left arm nice and correct. He could bat 6 for Australia, And James Pattinson was the other one we had on a massive gallop on. But I think there was actually something there though with Pattinson. Had Pattinson remained fit and firing, and he didn't experience the injuries that he did, I suspect he would have ended up a 7-8 option. A 7 option, more
From
often
8.
than from 8. But anyway, we usually get that wrong. We get excited,
but it's still not quite right. Like there are a lot of 8s who could maybe do 7 at a pinch. Big Marco is the obvious current example for me, where South Africa are desperately trying to make him a 7. They've been trying to make him a 7 for his whole career so far. He ain't. He's not a 7. He could hit a 6 here and there, but he can make a 50. But he, as we saw in the World Cup final, not quite there, but in Test cricket particularly, I think his first class average is about 20. And he hasn't played that much first class cricket outside the Test arena anyway, because that's just the way South African cricket works these days. But trying to push him up the order. Remember, Andy Bickle was one of those for a while. You'd sort of go, oh, Bickle. He did bat 7 in a couple of Tests, didn't he?
Batted 3. Batted 3. Remember the Sydney Test of 2000
at one time.
But it wasn't like Night Watchman stuff. They bunged him up to number 3 because they were chasing 400 plus. It was the Andy Caddick. Yeah. The Andy Caddick final Test match where he took 7 for. But Bickle wasn't a Night Watchman. Bickle was we can get the jump on these pricks. We're going to send Bick out there to hit 50 in a hurry. And he did hit like close to 50 in a hurry.
Yeah.
It did work. The problem was the next day the mountain was too high to climb.
Yeah, okay. Well, I certainly remember him batting 7 legitimately when they played 5 bowlers in the West Indies, and Gilchrist went 6. That didn't happen much, but there was an idea that he could bat 6, that he could maybe be a 6 above Gilchrist for a while, in the same way as Nisa more recently, makes a couple of first class tons, which maybe aren't the absolute highest standard of bowling that you can ever face, and people are like, could be playing 5, could be batting 5 in the Test team. We love it. We love this shit.
Fuck, he should be.
He probably should be.
What about Matty Critchley? Daniel and I had a fairly long gallop on Surrey comms about this last week about where he could end up in our hearts anyway. 10,000 Test runs and 500 Test wickets probably won't happen, but dare to dream.
Mitchell Johnson, remember he made the 100 and the 96 in South Africa, and suddenly it was like bat him at 7, get him up there. Get him, he's got to go up the order. Brett Lee even had a few moments, but it seems to be like you have a bowler who bats okay for a bit, and everyone talks them up, and then their batting just fades off naturally. Or you have the other way around, is you have batters who are okay with bowling, or they come in as a bowler, Steve Smith style or whatever it is, and then usually it's their bodies pack it in some way. The back starts to go, or the knee, or Michael Clark for a long time. It was like, he could pretty much play as a specialist spinner, and then the back starts to give out. Steve Smith starts off that way, and then he just doesn't really want to bowl anymore because he's just not as good at it as he is at batting, so he wants to do that. Even Mark Waugh for a while was basically being picked as an off spinner, and when they were touring the subcontinent, it's like, well, we don't need 2 spinners. We've got Mark Waugh. He makes 1.8 spinners, so good enough. That New Zealand team of that sort of era that was just full of blokes who could bowl a bit of decent medium seam and could bat, but weren't quite either. The Jacob Oram, Scott Styris, Andre Adams, Kyle Mills, Chris Cairns.
I was going to do it last week in that Cricket Writers game I told you about on Friday. I had 4. I felt like I had 4 bowlers. I'm like, fuck, what am I going to do here? So I was shopping around to our batters. Nathan Johns, who we've had on the show very recently, Irish Cricket Journal, moved to. I'm like, mate, do you bowl a bit of seam up for me? Can you do me a shift? Can you bowl me? And he's like, yeah, I mean, if you need me to. Thankfully, someone dropped out, so I was able to get Sheehan in the team, and he bowled 6 very nice overs, and that helped win us the game. So, but yeah, as a captain, you're always in that. Who can just become an all rounder for a day for me?
Yeah, can you pull this off for a day? So, and you can maybe do it for a day. It's harder to do it long term. You think about Ashwin making 100 in his second Test match and made 400s in his first 20 or 30 tests or something like that, all against West Indies. But he was batting 6 in Australia because they were like, all round, up and coming all rounder. But it just didn't quite last. He's still a very good 8. He's a very good 8 or a 9, but he made 1 Test 100 since then, which was a good innings. Nonetheless, it's the all rounder thing, and England maybe more than any other country had the all rounder obsession with the new Botham era, where there were so many guys who could do a bit of both. Who David Capel we've talked about on the show plenty of times. Craig White hot, the all out was it the Inside Edge magazine cover for 2002? White hot, this guy bowls absolute heat.
The 90 mile an hour man.
Because
the Darren Lehman's brother-in-law, and he bowls 90 mile an hour.
for about
Craig
5
White, get him
minutes.
in
He
there.
bowled 90 mile an hour, and then he went back to about 72. It's like everybody else. Dominic Cork for a bit had a little bit of batting credibility when the England tail was awful, and so at least he could sort of come in at 8 and maybe make a few. Darren Goff very briefly was whacking them, and people were like, "Ooh, could be a up and could maybe could become an all rounder." Ended up as a slogging 10. But I was looking at the '92 World Cup final, the real World Cup final, and it is fascinating in a way because you've got in that game Botham's playing, and 4 new Bothams are all playing in the same 11. You've got Derek Pringle there. You've got Chris Lewis there, you've got Dermot Reeve, and you've got Phil de Freitas. So you've got one original Botham, one old Botham, one very old Botham by that point, and 4 new Bothams in the same team. And that's what leads us to our answer, because the thing about being associated with a famous duck, I was thinking an innings, what if it's not an innings? What if it's a duck? What if it's not a real duck, but a notional duck? Phil de Freitas, his
Daffy.
nickname was Daffy Duck. Boom, boom, boom. Bustling seam bowler is what you would say. A lot of variations. Had a really good white ball domestic career. Won a bunch of titles domestically, and you had to change up the pace and all that kind of thing before it was such a standard thing, I suppose, across limited overs cricket. Red ball debuts for Leicestershire and has a massive first season, takes 94 wickets in his first year straight out the gate, and gets on the plane to Australia immediately. And he's good enough, does well enough in the lead up to debut in the first test. Comes in at number 9. He makes 40, batting with Botham, who makes 100. It's all going beautifully. Old Botham, new Botham handover. Gets David Boone out for 10. There's a bit of a partnership building with Dean Jones, and de Freitas comes back, and before Jones comes in with Tim Zura. Then Jones comes in, and de Freitas gets him LBW for 8, takes 3 more wickets in the game. So 5 wickets plus a match-defining partnership, which gets them, they win that test, England. They take the lead, and they end up winning the series. He plays 4 of the 5 tests on tour, the last winning series they'll have in Australia until 10-11.
There was a really excellent documentary made about the 86-87 Ashes. It was a radio documentary. We're going back a few years now, and they very kindly used me as the talking head, like the Australian accent, because I have an Australian accent. I live in London. It's a convenient time zone to record with me, probably. But I did quite a bit of research into 86-87 as a consequence. It's hard to overstate just how shit England were thought to be. I know everyone goes on about the can't bowl, can't bat, can't field headline that was written. But, going into that series, it was just taken as read, despite the ravages of the South African rebel tour and so on, and how depleted Australia were and where they were in their own rebuild. It was just taken as read that Australia would win. And then for England to have turned around, because they lost the tour game, I think, at Brisbane before going out and the Botham 100 and so on. And then the multitude of contributors they had in that win. And then it was a terrific win away from home, given how infrequently it happens. Illingworth side in 70, 71, and then 86, 87, 2010, 2011. I mean, they are rare things. They are rare beasts. So the fact that he was front and center of that speaks well of his legacy to the game.
Yeah, well, he almost goes on a rebel tour at one point as well, de Freitas.
Oh, right.
Which is a curious thing for it's a black British player, and basically later he said he just didn't know enough about it, and then kind of realised, was filled in on the broader context of it and the ramifications of the fact that he'd be banned for England, but he wasn't playing for England at the time. So initially he agreed to go and then later pulled out, but. He's batting. There was always the idea, I guess, and it starts with that first innings, that his batting might be good enough, and it never really, it very rarely is. So he doesn't make a Test 50 until 1991. He is batting against Malcolm Marshall and Curtly Ambrose and Courtney Walsh at that point, but at Trent Bridge probably a bit less threatening than they might have been elsewhere. Makes a couple of 50s against New Zealand, not the most imposing attack. He's batting in that Heath Davis debut at Trent Bridge that we talked about a few weeks ago. The New Zealand quick bowler who didn't really know where it was going. His best innings is Adelaide 95, I'd say, where Australia have won the first 2 tests. They've drawn the third, so Australia are holding at that point, aren't they? So they've retained the trophy, but the series is still up for grabs. And in Adelaide, England concede a lead of about 70, and the batting order's a bit short. They've got Chris Lewis at 7, De Freitas at 8 rather. So he comes in at 181 for 6. They're 110 in front in the third innings, and he goes on to make 88. Puts on 136 more runs, big partnership with John Crawley, right. And then has a partnership with Angus Fraser where they put on 47, of which Fraser makes 5. So De Freitas is doing the heavy lifting in that innings of 88, which sets them up with a big lead, and they win the match from there and stay in the series. I guess Australia win the 5th test eventually, but there's a point where with his contribution England could square it, but his wicket-taking abilities, 140 wickets at 33, not a bad record, not a show-stopping record. Had quite a few ineffective days overseas, but he also played in an era where England didn't back players very well, and he's I think historically still the most dropped England player. He got dropped and recalled just constantly, so often lacked confidence, often was just thinking about trying to stay in the team, was sort of the way that he assessed things. That interview is interesting where he's illuminating and looking back over that career. But the 100-100 thing is that he becomes the 100th player in Test cricket to take 100 wickets. So that is the 100-100 that makes the 200 that is our number. And the interview's good fun. He talks about accidentally punching out a window into the visiting change rooms just after he'd been dropped when Graham Gooch, the England captain, was in the visiting side, and De Freitas puts his elbow through a window and showers glass all over the visiting side. He's like, whoops, didn't mean that. Where's the quote? They said they asked him about the World Cup finals that he played in. He goes, well, this is his quote: "In the 1987 final, when Gat reverse swept the twat, we were cruising." And in 92 against Pakistan, Javed was bloody out how many times to Pringle, and Imran batted God knows how many overs for his 70. I had both of them out, wasn't given.
Well, yeah, it's true. Me and Dad was out to Dell twice, bang to rights. I still can't fathom how that happened that way. The one thing I remember for De Freitas at the end of his career, I can't remember whether he was playing or not. He was certainly there. I went to Grace Road in 2005 to watch the tour game, the Australia-Leicestershire tour game, which now is mostly remembered for Chris Rogers making a double ton against Australia as the pro at Leicester at the time. But Stuart Broad played in that game as an 18-year-old. I think he was 18-year-old. And I reckon De Freitas was club captain. Now, that means they wouldn't have, my instinct is that De Freitas was injured and missed the Aussie game, but they would have played together in 2005 when Broad was coming through. So, those links in the chain. De Freitas made his debut, his first class debut in 1985, and it takes it all the way through to Broad, who only made his retirement last year from first class cricket. So, who was the player that Stuart Broad played with last year when turning out for Notts, who was, 18 or 19, who, is it, I don't know, how old Lyndon James, someone like that who might go on and in 20 years time, go on and have a career that's noteworthy for England, or indeed just playing first class cricket. I'm going to check how old Lyndon James is. No, he's 25. That doesn't quite work with what I was saying. But the point I'm trying to make, that I like it when these things overlap, and ever so briefly, De Freitas, who went back to the mid 80s, did with Stuart Broad, who retired only last year.
There we go. That's what I've got for Paul Reeve, who, is he related to Dermot Reeve? Is that where his new Botham interest comes from? I don't know, but it wasn't about Dermot. It was about Daffy. That's it. That's Nerdpledge. If you want to play the game, go to patreon.com/thefinalword, and you can be part of the good times as well as helping us make this show.
Thank you, Jeff. Before we move on to the next major segment, I just want to remind everyone that we've got our rip-roaring NordVPN deal right there for you, nordvpn.com/TFW. I received a number of alerts on my phone a couple of days ago telling me that my 12 months is nearly up. I didn't take the TFW offer. I just bought it like a regular human being that goes onto the website and buys it. Had I known there was going to be a final word offer, well, I might have waited a month, although I wouldn't have, because I was on holiday at the time and I wanted to watch the Women's World Cup. I wanted to watch the Lionesses. I wanted to watch the Matildas. I had no choice. There was no way of subscribing to, where was I? Greek television at the time. So I did the right thing, and I accessed my sports and entertainment. I was able to access my favorite streams and the content from home. And that was the case no matter where I went through Europe or wherever I've been around the world. I can easily switch my virtual location to determine where I want to be, access apps and websites in other countries. There's also the point about when you get your social media censored, not relevant in Greece. They do not censor your social media access there. or anywhere else I might be taking my young family on a resort holiday, as is the way the rest of my holidays will be until I'm about 50.
What's the Greek version of WeChat?
Yeah, right.
that they use to
to
make sure that the Chinese government can keep tabs on what you're doing online, as opposed to all of the other governments who would never do that.
No, of course not. Of course not. I used to joke that like the AFP clearly like read my messages. Now they probably didn't. If you're the AFP and listening, I appreciate that was just a bit from me when I did all my, high, what they call it, top secret security clearance and all the rest of it, that I probably accepted on some paperwork somewhere that they could read all of my messages and end my life at a moment's notice. That almost certainly didn't happen, but it was a joke that I used to tell. I had this realization, Jeff, when I had to take Winnie. Well, not had to. I took Winnie to a school fete last week where she will go to school as of September, which is thoroughly harrowing that she's going to be in the formal school system at 4.5, because that's how it works over here. And realizing that, turning 40 as I do next month, my entire 40s will be defined by walking that route to the school gate, because, once you get Winnie through primary school and Peggy that'll follow her, that'll be a whole decade of my life walking up there and doing that thing, and probably a whole decade of going on holidays to places with kids clubs and stuff like that, where I probably will want to get my iPad out and watch some sport from a different country. So good thing that I've got NordVPN. NordVPN.com/TFW. 30-day money back guarantee if you don't like it, but whisper it. You're going to fucking love it. The best deal you can get is through us. All the usual caveats apply, which are, well, there aren't many of them really. You just hit the button, you go, and you're in. No. And why wouldn't you want to be in? Because this is the time of year people in the UK, and a lot of people listen to this podcast in the UK, are going on holiday. Don't go on holiday without a VPN. You'll miss a Jimmy Anderson wicket this weekend. You'll miss a fucking penalty shootout if you're going away this week. Yep. You'll miss some of the Tour de France. You'll miss Angelo Matthews unexpectedly touring with the Sri Lankan side and hitting 334 in a day. You don't want to run the gauntlet on that.
You don't want to run the gauntlet. Imagine if we could get Ange Matthews and Ange Postecoglou together for something
on a podcast.
Speaking
I was quite excited to see Postecoglou's a pundit on telly here during the Euros. I'm like, yeah. I always like it when Australians living in London get freelance broadcast work. I support this. This is excellent. Yep. Go, Ange.
All for it. I've just looked up the Greek for WeChat. Corvediajume is apparently how that's pronounced. Okay. So, somebody, if you're the Greek government and you want to keep tabs on people, start an app. That's the way to do it. Do it Greek style.
We have a lot of stuff to plow through before we finish the show, Jeff, because we've spent a bit of time talking politics, which absorbed a lot of our attention, consumed a lot of our attention.
Talk about the French election. Which,
can we?
Hell.
Can we?
Yeah, why not? We're this deep in the show. If anyone's still here, then
let's do electoral system stuff for a while. Can we? First past the post is an undemocratic shit heap of a system. Now, I know that it has definitely benefited my political party on Thursday. I know that. The vote efficiency was superb. The fact that Labor, in a non-aggression pact with the Lib Dems, managed where they ran against each other and where they ran dead was sensational. Political professionals earning their money, good as gold, thumping majority, brilliant. But 4 million fucking votes for 4 seats, that's not how it's meant to work. Similarly with the Greens. Now, I don't mind minor parties receiving a lot of votes and not getting parliamentary representation. That's where the alternate vote, that's where preferential voting solves it all. You don't just get to have your say once, you get to have your say multiple times as you number down the ticket. And it means, those reform voters would have ended up on the Conservatives pile probably at a proportion of 95-5. And that would have been annoying.
It's basic parenting stuff though, right? Where you're like, okay, do you want, out of these options, which one do you want? Do you want the strawberry? You want this? Kid's like, I want the hazelnut. Okay, well, someone else has already chosen that one. So now you don't get a chocolate, as opposed to someone else has already chosen that one. So which of the other ones do you want? So as you go through your group, okay, well, this candidate's not available anymore. So out of the remaining ones, what's your choice? That does seem to be pretty fucking democratic, I would say.
It's extremely democratic. And how could you, the United Kingdom, it's been around for a really long time. Of all the electoral systems available, New Zealand's got a pretty good system too, the list and the hair clerk and the top up. There are other countries. What do we say? Other electoral systems are available, to use the BBC jargon. You don't just need to have, you got more votes, therefore you win, when it's clearly anti-democratic. I'm not asking for PR. PR's a shit show when you have that in lower houses. We all know that. Having some form of multi-member electorate in the upper house, sure, if you want to use PR there, go for gold. Kind of like the Australian Senate, if you wanted to use the exact model. But preferential voting, if Starmer's fair income about trying to make Britain a more democratic country over time, I know he's talked a little bit about Lord's reform when he was when he was more junior in the party.
Torch it.
But if he's
Abolish the whole thing.
serious about democratic change, get that AV, as they call it over here, preferential voting. I know, dust that off. I know it didn't do well at a referendum in 2011, but that's when Labor was in opposition. Do it from government, have a real go, and get rid of this ridiculously undemocratic system that does nothing but encourage silly tactical voting and the worst of candidates. And anyway, that's my 2 cents on this.
Get rid of it. Also, compulsory voter turnout. What they have, 52%. Jesus Christ!
Yeah, a bit more than that in the end. That number swelled as they went through. But I know that people say that compelling people to vote isn't the right thing to do either. But you're not compelled to vote. You're compelled to turn up. You
don't actually have to vote.
You're compelled to turn up. That's right.
Have to show up.
Get your name ticked off the list.
Cast a vote.
And 95% of people who are on the electoral roll show up and do the right thing, and 5% of them get a $100 fine from the AEC. Well, fuck me, big deal. In the grand sweep,
I think it's like $30.
$30, sorry. Right.
It's completely notional.
Yeah,
but and then you can just write a letter to get out of it. But that just takes more effort than actually voting. So the point is just vote. But you can, the Australian method, you can get it months beforehand. So basically, as soon as the election's called, you can get your postal vote sent out. You can take care of it that way. It's really not difficult to do, but it memeans that nobody's wasting their money on trying to get people to show up.
Yeah.
They're actually campaigning on the thing that they're campaigning for.
Yeah, getting the vote out is nonsense.
I don't have an intimate understanding of how the French system works.
Fun.
I do have an intimate understanding of the fact that it's good that the Nazis didn't win. And that they were disappointed in their push where they thought they were a genuine contender for forming government, and they ended up way short of that.
Yeah, and look, the fash right in the Le Pen group in France are no more extreme than the reform mob over here, by the way. You scale it back and listen to the rhetoric. And different system with the elimination of candidates and scaling it back. And this isn't the first time we've seen the Le Pen lot do well in the first round. That happened in 2017 as well, where there was a genuine threat. Then Macron came through the middle and all was fine. But what a organising power the mainstream left party was there, to having been in the electoral doldrums for a time at that level, to come out and fucking pump them. So that's all happened in the space of a week too. So it's a little bit about what can happen when you got the foot to the back of your throat, when you need to perform, when I wouldn't say democracy's on the line in that case, but certainly a lot of democratic norms and institutions as we know them in that country would have been under threat had forget what they're called now. What are the hard right called over there? I've forgotten the name of them. Whatever they are.
The RN. The Rassemblement National.
Those registered nurses always get...
it's always the registered... It's the Royal Navy. It's the fucking Royal Navy coming in. But look, if you want to fix England, torch the House of Lords, get rid of the honour system, compulsory voting, preferential system.
I think keep the House of Lords, just make it democratic. All you need to do is just, again, I don't want to be too simplistic.
Called having a Senate.
You have a Senate. You have the upper house still.
Something you can get appointed to for life to get a pension from.
Right, but you don't want to get rid of an upper house. We see what happens in Queensland with having an upper house. Yeah, just start again. Start again. Have another crack.
Torch it.
Have another go.
Yeah.
But he won't do that, right? He won't do that. But the lower house stuff, that'd be more powerful in the first place, because that's where you govern from. All right.
Speaking of teams who were getting...
Are we done on politics?
During the week, the New Zealand women's team.
Oh, funny that.
Which happened again.
Yeah.
Bit of rain involved. 211 for 8. Poor old Amelia Kirch has to keep making all the runs and trying to take all the wickets. Lauren Bell took a 5 for England, ran it down in 38 and a half overs. Nat Siver-Brunt, imagine that, her making all the runs against New Zealand. 76 not out. They were in a bit of early trouble.
Yeah,
33
they were.
for 3 with Hannah Rowe, who I still enjoy the work of very much, but did it pretty comfortably. Amy Jones runs again, 50 for her. That feels important too. Jones is sort of, finally starting to shake off the inconsistency thing in the last year or so, I guess, after being so patchy for so much of her career before that. Alice Capsey made 35 not out. Nothing surprising there, but it's another one of those scores where at the halfway mark for New Zealand, you go, well, it could be okay. But no, they got done.
Yeah, they're going to lose 8-0 New Zealand. I'd be very surprised. That first T20 that followed, that was at Southampton, England win by 59 runs after making 197 for 3. Danny Wyatt made 76 from 51. Congrats to Danny, by the way, who got married a few weeks ago, which was a nice thing on social media. I also love the way that she dealt with the the fuckwits on socials that couldn't quite get their heads around the fact that she was marrying a woman, and Danny in her classics.
How is that allowed in this day and age?
Yeah, there were a lot. You can probably imagine the kind of commentary on that. Anyway, but she's a gem. Siva Brunt, 47, Bouchier, 32, opening. She's opening in both formats now, Maya. She's away. And Fry Kemp, up at 5 now. We spoke about all-rounders before. They really, really, really want Freya Kemp to make it as an all-rounder. 26 not out, number 5. Not the first time she's batted in the top 6 in a T20, but interesting that they brought her in at the fall of the 3rd wicket. New Zealand, 138 for 9. As always, it's got to be, Bates, Devine, Kerr, one of the 3. Bates makes 43 from 33, but it's not enough. Kerr, 38 down the list. They're never really in it. There are 3 ducks in the middle order there. Sarah Glenn, leg spinner, 3 for 17. Charlie Dean, off spinner to die for, 2 for. All 4 spinners got wickets. England win by a mile. There are still 4 more T20s. Hove and Canterbury during the week. Then we go to the Oval and Lords for the set piece events, which are trying to sell out. I gather the ticket sales are really good for those. Gee, they could do with some competitive opposition, though. I really can't see a world where New Zealand win a game for all of the reasons that we've bemoaned of late. So that's been going on over there. Jeff, South Africa had a win over in India, the women. They lost 3-0 in the one-dayers, and they lost the test match last week, which Cam and I spoke about in some depth. But in the first T20, South Africa...
Yeah, the test was interesting, wasn't it?
Yeah,
a lot went on in that test match.
It was good, really, really good. First T20... the South Africans made 189 for 4. Tasman Brits, 81. Top scored, batted well at the top of the list. Marizanne Kapp was the finisher with 57 from 33. Marizanne signed a 3-year deal with the Melbourne Stars during the week, Jeff, by the way. So she'll be down at the G through until 2027 or whatever that works out to be.
Interesting. But so Marizanne Kapp, who has played for the Sixers for ages and then went to Perth for a little bit, didn't she? Played for the Scorchers. So like the 2 powerhouse legacy winning sides of the WBBL.
Yep.
And then she's chosen to go to the team with the strongest loser energy of the entire competition.
She could turn it around. She's got winner energy, Cappy, so,
Well, she does, but like, why has she agreed to that? Why? Like, how much more could they have been offering her than any of the other teams to get her? Like, she'll be their entire side.
Well, that might be why, right? They might have seen that there might have been some cap. You'd think if anyone's got some salary cap,
and the bowling, and
she's not bowling at the moment because it's her back, isn't it? But yeah, still, regardless of how she's going, closer to the point she'll be their most important player. India fell short, 177 for 4, so they lost by 12 runs. Jemima she nearly won the game for them, Rodrigues, 53 not out from 30 balls. There was like 21 needed from the last over, but she took heaps of runs from overs 18 and 19. But Malaba did well, held her nerve and won the game for South Africa. 2 more games in that series.
I thought you said for a second there that Jimmy Ma had made 53. You said Jemima,
Jemima,
as in Rodrigues, but I thought you said, Jimmy Ma's playing for the
that's a stretch.
Indian women's team. That's a real turn up for the books. I mean, I know he kept wicket in 2003, and that was unexpected, but he's not that versatile.
No,
he's been out of the game a little while, but still hitting them okay.
Well, you don't know what you don't know. Who knows what Jimmy Ma's up to these days? So 2 more games in that series before South Africa get to go home. Hey, Jeff, staying with the women, you're more across this than I am. The open letter from the Afghanistan refugee team. I touched on it in the intro earlier. They're all living in Australia. They've written to Greg Barclay, and it's quite a measured letter, I thought, reading through it. Yeah. They've said that they are happy to celebrate the men's success at the same time as expressing profound sadness that they can't play. They want the ICC's assistance to help them facilitate a refugee team administered by the East Asian Cricket Office, which apparently is based at Cricket Australia. So it all kind of lines up here. To me, it seems like a quite a logical, when you're talking about marginal gains, this wouldn't achieve huge amounts, but we've seen what's happened at Olympic Games in the past where teams have played under the Olympic flag. And I suppose in this scenario, they could play under the ICC flag or something like that. This feels like something that should be looked at seriously.
Well, and it's an idea that's been floating around for as long as they've been there since the Taliban takeover, that there should be some formal backing of that side, given most of the players ended up in the same place. A couple ended up in the UK and elsewhere, but it would also be a destination thing in that it would give other women athletes from that country the idea that maybe that's where they should go if they can get out of Afghanistan, because they don't see a future for themselves there, and there isn't a future for them there as participating members of society. So the idea's been there before. I think they were clever in using the fact that there was all this attention around the Afghanistan men's team to say, well, let's make our case again and make sure that this gets publicised. And they have to be tactical about it to make sure that they're supportive of the men's team so that people don't accuse them of trying to ruin everybody's fun or whatever it is, which they don't want to do. I mean, the sort of impression I've had from talking to members of the Afghan community in Melbourne is that they do want their men's team participating. They want them doing well. Even the female players still get the same sort of pride and enjoyment out of seeing their compatriots doing well on the world stage. They just also want the opportunity to not just be rendered completely invisible. But it won't happen. Basically, it won't happen because it would need to be funded by the Afghanistan Cricket Board's amount of funding, which obviously the ACB will never do it. The ICC could institute a ruling to say that because Afghanistan is not meeting its commitment to fund a women's program, which it has to do, that they could sequester an amount of the funding that's supposed to be passed on to Afghanistan and keep that and redirect it. The ICC won't do that because they've always said so far that they have no right over the money that goes to members. They have no right to tell members how to spend that money. They only have the responsibility to disperse the funds, and after that, they've got no say over it, which isn't true because they do pull up members for other things all the time and suspend members for other breaches of conventions and all that kind of stuff. There is an amount of oversight. They suspended Zimbabwe cricket, which involved financial irregularities and things like that previously. So it's not actually true what they say, but that's the line that they're running, is that we can't possibly tell any member what to do with their money. And other members don't want to set that precedent either because they don't want to risk having interference from the ICC about how they're spending their own money. So basically, in order to maintain the status quo for the more powerful boards, nothing will be done in relation to this, and it will be left to quietly fizzle out again until the next time that there might be a bit of attention on Afghanistan if they do well in the Champions Trophy or something like that. So it's a fine idea. I have absolutely no hope or confidence that it will go anywhere. But what can you do? You can either say nothing or you can keep trying to speak up when you can, and that's at least what these women are
kind
doing.
of what we said a fortnight ago on one of the programs we made about how Afghanistan's men doing well at the T20 World Cup will probably mean that there isn't any change. The status quo is serving all parties well because they're performing in World Cups, they're bringing in eyeballs and so on. And look, there's the other bits of this as well with the we touched on it earlier with Dan. I mean, how does the BCCI command so much power around the ICC decision-making tables? Well, it's because they have the support of other full members, and why would they do anything here to back in something that would agitate Afghanistan? It doesn't stand to reason. So there's that. As for Australia's piece in all of this, Nick Hockley has said during the week that they are talking with the ACB being the Afghanistan Cricket Board, not the old acronym for the
Malcolm Speed
Australian
and
Cricket
co
Board.
knocking around, covering up Shane Warne's betting scandals.
Yeah, that's right. He said they're in a regular dialogue. That's how he described it. But that doesn't mean bilateral cricket will resume between Australia and Afghanistan until, again, his words, a level of progress has been made. And of course, that's not going to happen because there'll be no level of progress when the Taliban are in power. So, make of all that what you will. Jeff, on other bad stuff, just a passing note, I'm not at all blaming the person in question for this, but Pat Cummins is playing for the San Francisco Unicorns in the MLC. And I just note that his club, which David White's front and centre of, an administrator who deserves more scrutiny from us at some point, the former chief executive of New Zealand Cricket, who's now running the Unicorns. Anyway, a leading betting agency in Asia called, let me get this right, Mega Casino World is their major sponsor. I don't know how Pat's going to feel about that.
I'm glad that their ambition has got bigger because, you could go to Casino World, but would it be big enough? Would a world of casinos be enough? No. I would like to go to a world of casinos that's mega. Yeah. That's the kind of casino world.
But it's the shirt sponsor. So unfortunately for Pat, I'm not assuming. I don't imagine he'll actually play any games for this team, right? Like it's the 5-year signing, but it'll be It'll be, I'm sure,
4.
it'll be in theory more than in reality for Pat. I can only imagine, like, why would he not take every minute of time off that's at his disposal? But I digress. He will, have to play with that mega casino world on his shirt. Don't think he'll be best pleased about that. But what can you do? That's the situation they find themselves in when they decide to go on the circuit. Say again?
You could not play for them. There is that.
Yeah, I suppose. But now the deal is done. Cummins was signed before Mega Casino World War.
Mega Casino World.
That could be the get out there. Jeff, moving on to the domestic scene in Australia or in the UK, where I am. I'm in England, Adam. I'm not in Australia. There's bits going on. I thought, like, the county round last week, we talked about Gloucestershire, Glamorgan on the weekend show, but there were some other really important and significant results through the competition. Staying in Division 1 off the top, Surrey, it's really their comp to lose now. They won their blockbuster first versus second clash against Essex by 145 runs. We spoke last week, Cam and I, about Jamie Smith's 100 as part of Surrey's 262. Then they bowled out Essex for 180. They had Walter and Critchley making important runs in the middle, but then it fell away. Unfortunately for Essex, their leading run scorer this season, Jordan Cox, who came over from Kent last year, he's got the fourth most runs in the country, I think. He fell down with appendicitis on day one of the game, so had to get it operated on and taken out at night one, but they couldn't replace him. So it did prompt a bit of a conversation around when should you be able to have a substitute? Is a general anaesthetic enough? And Daniel and I...
Why wasn't he there morning too? Didn't want it enough, clearly.
Daniel and
Get out there. Get out. What do you think Ernest Tildesley would have done?
Well, I wonder what you think about this. Daniel and I were like, well, the problem is if you set the criteria, like at the moment you get a sub if you're concussed, right? Yep. Independent medical verification. There was COVID for a while, but it's a very clear process you go through for concussion subs. And occasionally you hear about, well, if you've broken a bone or whatever. Isn't the problem if general anaesthetic is the criteria for an operation that they will just...
They'd be knocking bricks out right, left, and centre.
They'll just take advantage. Some teams just take advantage of that and have the anesthesiologist in there jabbing blokes and knocking them out. So
you've bowled 4 overs, none for 46, and then you're on the bench at the dugout with the chloroform over your nose. Woof, he's out.
If it isn't my old friend Mr. McCreek whittling for an arm and an arm for a leg, a bit of that might go on to make sure they don't bowl in the second innings. But yeah, anyway, Jordan Cox missed out. Essex were chasing 361 in the end. Oh, nice story here. Surrey second innings, they made 278. Ryan Patel made 107. He played every game in 2022, including the game they played against the Sri Lankan, including the 2 black holes, including the game against the Sri Lankan development side. Like he was crucial to that victory. But then what did Surrey go and do at the end of 2022? They recruited Dom Sibley, which meant suddenly poor old Ryan Patel was out of the team, has barely played since, gets his chance this week and rattles off 100. So I was thrilled to see that, batting down at like number 6 or number 7 or something like that. Essex were set too many, 361, all at 215. Tom Laws, star of the future, 4 for 26. It won't be long before you see him in England squads. And Clark, of the Jordan variety, picked up 3 more wickets after 3 in the first. I've been saying it for a while now, but if Stokes stepped on a cricket ball and they were looking for an all-rounder at short notice, I would be picking Jordan Clark. If they needed a bloke to play for England, he's done everything you could do since moving to Surrey a few years ago, and that win has pushed Essex back to 3rd spot. It was a bad loss. So it's like 2 wins for Surrey. They've taken out a divisional rival and they're well ahead on the points table. Somerset, Jeff, have leapfrogged Essex with a thrilling win down at Taunton. This is an amazing chase that, if not for what happened in Glamorgan, Gloucestershire, would have been the story of the week. Warwickshire made 412, and then they made 281 for 8 declared after bowling at Somerset for 284 in their first innings. Oliver Hannon-Dolby, who we suspect listens to the podcast, picked up 6 wickets for Warwickshire. I'm going to keep saying it until it's true. Somerset is set 410 in one day on the final day. That's like Leeds 48 shit, right? One day, 410 to win. They still needed 188 with a session to go, and they fucking did it. Tom Abel, who, had that tough start to the year, relinquished the captaincy, tore his hamstring, 152 not out of the best. Tom Banton made 81 after making 78 in the first innings. And James Rue, who everyone's very excited about, the teenage sensation, 57 not out from 54 balls to make certain of it. Complete carnage. Finished the game with a 6. Second biggest chase in Somerset history, and all happened in one day. So, they're still a way off. Sorry, they're still, more than a game behind them, but they're not it could happen for Somerset, who of course have never won the bloody thing.
Serious. It's serious business to like we keep saying that things have changed, that sort of teams go about things differently, but they didn't. 100 years ago, you did have results like this here and there. I suppose they got more overs in as well, and some more of the bowling was absolute dross sent down by some local rich guys who just happened to manoeuvre themselves into the team at number 8. But still, I saw the James Anderson stuff, the 7 for bugger all, and how he came on and nipped out 6 in his opening spell.
It's crazy.
In that game at Nottinghamshire, that was quite the thing. And hearing Nathan Lyon chat about standing at mid-off, chatting to Anderson in between deliveries and sort of working out what he was trying to do, and the novelty of being in a team with him rather than in a team against him, as Lyon's been so many times.
It was really nice, wasn't it? Like, they only played in one game together because Anderson only set himself up for one game, that one at Southport against Notts. It ends up a draw and so on because they lose time to rain. Jennings makes a big 100 for Lancs before they go to work with the ball. And Anderson, 16 overs, 3 maidens, 7 for 35. His first spell, we had all 6, Jeff. We were talking Lakers and so on, but 6 for 19 from 10 in one spell. All that moaning you see on the Facebook forums. I can't believe they're free, those Facebook forums. They should charge admission for those crazies talking to each other. We're complaining about how Anderson, hadn't prepared adequately, what a disgrace it was that he wasn't playing for Lancashire, shouldn't play for England, and so on. And I think Jim might know his body. I think he might know what he's doing at 41. Anyway, Lyon picked up a couple in the follow-on, and those nice conversation, social media posts about each other, which was, that they'll probably never be on the same cricket field again, right? So that was a bit of a thing, having played against each other in Test cricket going back to 2013. Both Notts and Lancs are, they've got work to do. There's 5 rounds to go. They're not safe. They're kind of mid-table at the moment. They won't win it, though. Kent are the team that looks set for the drop. They've been pumped in the end by 6 wickets by Hampshire, but Hampshire made 505 for 8 declared in like
waiting for the
a
drop.
Day. Yeah. James Vince.
Steve O'Keefe at revolver. Waiting for here it comes.
And the drop was being facilitated by DJ James Vince, who made 211. And Ben Brown, the wicketkeeper, made 110. James Vince, every time he makes runs, you're like, how didn't it happen for him? Such a nice player.
Didn't it happen?
Kent were, they made 343. Jack Leaney made 100. But it was the old firm. Barker 4, Abbas 3, Abbott 2, Fuller 1. How often have we talked about a combination of those 4 bowlers, Jeff, for Hampshire bowling out teams over the last few years? And then Abbott took 5 more in the second innings to make sure of it and give Hampshire the victory. And Kent are in a world of pain. Last game in Division 1 was quite relevant to goings up and goings down as well, with Worcestershire winning their first game of the season. So they're still in second last spot, but they get up to 91 points and they're only 5 points away from Warwickshire. And they knocked off Durham, who were within striking distance of Essex and Surrey before the round started, but they lost by 6 wickets in a low scoring affair. Worcestershire chased 231 in the 4th innings. Kashif Ali, who's a graduate of the South Asian Cricket Academy, made 76 not out. He was the match winner after a 50 in the first innings. So that's Divi 1 with Surrey 157, Somerset 134, Essex 128. They're the 3 genuine contenders, although you'd think it's really a matter of whether Surrey can do what they need to do in the last 5 rounds. The next round's on the 22nd of August. As for Division 2, Sussex onwards towards Division 1, acknowledging we've already talked about the greatest game ever on Storytime. So the main game that mattered was whether Sussex could knock off Northamptonshire in Northampton, and they did by 63 runs. Another low-scoring game. They were set 284 Northamptonshire, and it was Nathan McAndrew taking 5 for 73. They've got a buffer of about 1.5 games now, Sussex, on their rival Middlesex, who are in second spot, and Middlesex botched it. They had their chance to push ahead and get towards the top against Leicestershire at Grace Road, but they were defeated by 123 runs after being bowled out for 86 in their first innings. And then Leicestershire eventually took the points fairly comfortably. Middlesex was set 466. And even though Toby Rowland-Jones made a 50 and took 9 wickets, it wasn't enough for them to get back into the game, but Middlesex remain in second. And the last game, to quickly recap, is down at the bottom of the table. Derbyshire have had a horrible loss to Yorkshire by an innings and 204 runs at their outground Chesterfield. At Derbyshire were all out 76. Vishwa Fernando, who we saw bowl in the World Cup last year, Jeff, for Sri Lanka, picked up 5 in the first, 4 in the second. Yorkshire made 451 for 9 between times, tons for Wharton and Tattersall. And then Ben Code, the ever-reliable, picked up 6 as Derbyshire were bowled out for 171. I saw some stuff online about Mickey Arthur kind of wanting to galvanise Derbyshire, saying this is the time for the fans to come together to unite as a club, and still getting shit canned for that again on those same weirdo Facebook forums. But Mickey Arthur has got no resources. He's doing what he can with what he's got. And so it is in the Blast as well, where it's been ever so difficult. I think they had a win yesterday in the Blast Derbyshire. We'll talk about the Blast next week. But the only bit of white ball news in domestic land, Jeff, is that Harry Brook has been appointed captain of the Superchargers, and Andrew Flintoff has been appointed coach of the Superchargers. What do you think that means? Have you got a feeling? I think I know what that means, and you wouldn't be the only one to draw the conclusion that it's almost certain, isn't it, that Brook and Flintoff are going to take over that white ball team. It just feels like that's the natural progression for England, that is.
It makes sense, right? I mean, will Butler stick it out for a bit longer? It doesn't. I mean, it hasn't been a raging success.
No.
Well, I suppose they've got the 2022 title under his captaincy, but that's in a way, to me, that feels more like what would happen with the Test team if they keep things split up. Would be, by the time Stokes is done, it's another 6 to 18 months or whatever it is down the line. Brooks had that extra little bit of time in the team, and then maybe he's ready to take that over. And Flintoff replacing McCullum seems like more like what Rob Key would want to do with the red ball team than the white ball team. I don't know.
Maybe, but it just seems so obvious, doesn't it? Like, they love Flintoff. They think he's doing great work. Like, if there's a job going, like, that's probably the job he gets. I mean, I don't know. I might be being too simplistic in my analysis here, but when I saw that Brook news come through, I'm like, well, that's a sign, isn't it? That's a sign of what they want the future to look like for England cricket. And, if you go through the team list, it'd want to be Brook, because I don't know whether there's anyone else that jumps out as the next white ball captain of England, unless Butler just stays on in a job for 2 or 3 more years, but it doesn't feel likely. So anyway, time will tell on that front. Last bit to get through here, Jeff, before we say goodbye, is the Rachel Hayho Flint Trophy. We are a fair way advanced in that tournament now after a few games on the weekend. So 8 games have been played by each of the teams. That's a 14-game regular season. So some way to go still. Up at the top of the table, the Southern Vipers have returned. They're on 27 points. The Sunrisers and the Diamonds are on 25, and the Stars are on 23. But only 2 games yesterday. There was one washed out between the Sparks and the Sunrisers over at Radlett. The Stars defeated the Thunder comfortably. Bryony Smith top scored with 67. Then Rhiannon McDonald-Gate. A lot of people talking about her in the context of whether she might get a start with England. Good spinner, 4 for 34. And the Western Storm only made 200 for 5. I think it looks like it was a rain-reduced game, but still, that wasn't enough to hold back the Diamonds, who won on Duckworth Lewis by 6 wickets, 199 for 4. Holly Armitage, another century, 101 not out. She's had a terrific season. So, yes, we will keep a closer eye on the Hayho Flint as we get towards the business end of the season through August and September.
Yeah, the weirdest thing about that entire thing is seeing a team called the Stars in the top 4. It never happens in any other T20 comp that we look at.
Very good. Well, at least that's the 50-over comp. They did do.
Sorry, yeah,
but still, your point stands.
If the Melbourne Stars could play 50-over cricket, if there were a franchise-based league, then they'd be last in that as well.
All right, as we say goodbye, go back to where we started and thank all of our patrons. If you want the ad-free feed and you want to support what Jeff and I are doing, lots of daily shows coming up, lots of other programs, interviews, book club, other work that we do, weekly shows, story time. It's the full board at the moment this time of year. We'd love to have you. Patreon.com/the final word. Grab the ad-free feed, grab the Discord channel password and all the other bits and pieces. And you're flying on that front. Thank you to Westfield London, Westfield Stratford City. More extra, less ordinary. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I think that's us done. Our next episode will be from Lords tomorrow, the Jimmy farewell preview and the dailies that follow. All right. Bye for now.
All righty.